Okay, am I audible enough?
Yes.
Because I don't want to bend and keep talking. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah, thank you. So in the interest of time, I am directly going to come to the point, and I'm also going to keep reading this because as a teacher, you're so used to getting carried away, go in the flow, and then extend beyond limits now because I'm also the MC, I'm not going to do that. But I think when Sudhir read out the code of ethics, we read these words again and again: diversity, inclusivity, inclusive culture. But do we introspect a little in depth about it? I don't think so, because so the first response that I get when I say D.E.I is that, did you just misspell die? Or even worse, they'll say something like, of course we know what it is, how can we not know? It's distance education initiatives. And I'm like, okay, I wish it was that, but currently it's not. So fortunately, none of this is true. D.E.I stands for diversity, equity and inclusion. And I think all of us understand diversity very well. Meaning that your workforce should be a good mix with men, women, young, old, different religions, different states, everyone coming together to make the place grow. Now we all, I think, agree with that, there is no doubt about that, but there's a little problem here. The greater the diversity, the greater the chances of discrimination. And India being one of the most diverse countries, the chances of discrimination are also quite a bit. So this is what exactly D.E.I is about. It is about eliminating all kinds of discrimination and still preserving the diversity. So what are these different kinds of discrimination that we are talking about? And most importantly, when did ASHRAE start talking about this so diligently? So the story goes back to 2020, which is the COVID times. Obviously, none of us can forget that time, when a lot of Asian Americans, they started facing a lot of discrimination in the country because they just looked Chinese. And there were a lot of hate crimes happening. Now this almost coincided with the Black Lives Matter movement, where the murder of George Floyd, it raised an alarm in everyone's mind, and even so more in the HVAC industry, because ASHRAE initiated this, saying that, okay, we have been talking about women in ASHRAE, and that's very important because HVAC industry has just 2% women workforce, and I believe the gender ratio here says as well, no offense, but yeah, that's true. I'm not bluffing. So it is very important to open our eyes and ears to other kinds of discrimination and go far behind women in ASHRAE. That's where you have the D.E.I in place. And they started addressing it at a very grassroots level, starting with language. So things like, good evening everyone, ladies and gentlemen, no, not allowed, because what if you're not from the two genders that we know of? Even things like, if you can see in the slide where I have written racial, the slide shows where you have the black background and the white text in front. That was also, I just request everyone away, can you please maintain silence here? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. So if you look at that tile over there, black background and with something white which is in the foreground, that was also discouraged because it means that white is more important than black, referring to the racial discrimination. So that's when the world started switching more and more to blue and white, which gives you enough of visibility, enough of readability, but it doesn't have this black-white theme in place. Coincidentally, it also aligns with what ASHRAE was already using as a color code for their slides. Even words like blackmail was discouraged, and a lot of other changes in the language. Now, anyone over here would feel, ye to baat ka batangad banana hai, like, why do you want to make mountain out of molehills? But actually, that's not the idea. The idea is just using these tools to draw the attention to these matters. It's like advertising. You draw the attention to these matters so that people become aware and they start talking about it. But if I ask you, does D.E.I even make sense to developing countries like India? a country where getting a job or getting a decent salary is a bigger problem than how DEI friendly a work environment is. I'm not even thinking about how people are going to treat me at my workplace. I'm more concerned about, will I be paid well? Will I get the job? These are our bigger problems. So, also getting a job done on the deadline is a far bigger problem than how polite did I sound when I demanded some work from someone. So these are our problems, which are so different from what happens in the West. Now, if you look at the West, there are all these kinds of discrimination that they are talking about. But if you look at the Indian context, in addition to the discriminatory keywords that were written in orange, the ones written in the center are our D.E.I, our kinds of discrimination. So there are so many, but I won't highlight all of them. But I want to specifically highlight two. The one which is between the physical labor and the mental labor. Now when I say physical labor, I mean all our workers, technicians, anyone who's doing more physical job, even cleaners. When I say mental labor, it's probably all of us because we are able to understand what I'm speaking, hopefully, and things like that. So there's so much of discrimination even between these two. So while the mental labor sits on the cushioned chairs, the physical labor sits on the whole day on the plastic chairs that we've given them. And if that's not enough, we conveniently forget them on our annual picnics. Even if they come with us, they are there to serve us. And also, dining at annual dinners, we eat first and they eat next. So we don't realize, it is very easy for us to say, oh, treat everyone equally over here. But actually, that may not be true. Even amongst the mental labor, which is people like us, we discriminate on the basis of English proficiency. Because unfortunately, we don't consider English a language. We consider it as a skill set. If you know English, I'll send you to a conference. If you know English, you will meet your client. If you know English, this, that, this. And no matter how skilled the person is, it is the English litmus test that you have to go through to move ahead. And nowadays, we've also started discriminating on the basis of food preferences and political opinions. I'm not going to talk more about this, but I know what you know what I mean, right? So I know what all of y'all are thinking, that all this is a mindset problem. What can the employer do about it? How can even we think about solving this? Okay, fair enough. So let's look at some practical ways in which the employers can address this discrimination through some examples from the HVAC industry itself in developing countries like India and the neighboring countries. And in the process also understand words like equity and inclusion. Diversity we already know about, equity and inclusion we'll get to see. So every employer thinks that I'm treating everyone the same because I'm giving them equal salary, I'm giving everyone equal number of leaves. So how can I not be equal to them? But if you look a little further, in spite of treating everyone equally, some people have an advantage and some people have a disadvantage. I'm just going to take 3 examples from the HVAC industry itself and the measures that they took. Is that the time remaining? Yeah, okay. From the 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you look closely, in spite of treating everyone equally, there are problems. And I'll come to that. So the commute you take to work puts you either at a disadvantage or an advantage. So in one of the cities, or not one of the cities, in fact many of the cities in India, Pakistan and a lot of neighboring countries, what happens is women are discouraged from taking transports which are overcrowded, like trains and buses. Now, they are discouraged from doing that either due to religious reasons or safety concerns. Both fair enough. So what they end up doing is they end up taking either the auto rickshaw or the cab, which is an expensive form of public transport. So although at the end of the month, what happens is that although the male and the female, both of them are given, let's say, 1 lakh per month, the woman ends up saving far lesser for no fault of hers. So then what do you do? So one of the CEOs of the HVAC company, and I'm not even kidding, I will share the sources if you want. What she did was that she said that what we will do is we will travel allowance, or maybe we will arrange for a pig drop. Now that extra support is called equity. It's one step ahead of equality. So it's not equality that we are aiming at. We are in the 21st century. It's equity that we should be aiming at. The second example that I want to share is of color blindness. A few companies actually have started conducting color blindness tests. Why? Because 10% of India is colorblind. Now, imagine our technicians and workforce who don't even know about this. And it will be surprising for you to know this 10% of India that is colorblind, the biggest problem is red-green color blindness. All our HVAC pipes, all our wires that we see, we all know how frequent red and green is. And then you can't expect the technicians to know the color. So again, there's no problem with the workers and the technicians. The problem is that we are not getting them diagnosed because they probably are not literate enough to know what color blindness is. So you get them diagnosed, it is easy, you just give them a color correction lens and that solves the problem. Even when you write things like gas line, fire line, it helps them. But you can't just write once on a big line running. Yeah, so that's another equity initiative. One more example that I want to share is, if you look at the physical labor, I'm again saying physical labor, the workers that we are talking about. One more HVAC company, they provided greater health insurance to the physical labor as compared to mental labor. Considering the fact that the physical labor is far more vulnerable to health hazards due to consistent chemical exposure, consistent noise exposure, respiratory hazards, electric shocks, falls, heat stress and so much more. Because of the physical environment they are in. We are happily sitting in this AC room. So it matters how you deal with these problems and take initiatives of equity. Likewise, there are so many such aspects that one can look into, but I'm not going to spend more time on it. It's all about bringing someone to that line of equity. And there are so many other examples that I can keep going on about, but I'm not going to do that. I just want to draw your attention to one more example. Equity is not just about knowing your workforce, it is also knowing about your own country. And I want to highlight it with this example. Can you see those dots on the remote controls and on the elevators? I'm sure everyone knows that this is called Braille language, which is the language of the blind. We think that we are very advanced because we give Braille markings everywhere. Statistically, 20% of the world's blind population is in India, which is about 80 lakh. That's equivalent to the population of Ahmedabad or equivalent to the population of New York. That's how high the number is. So obviously your users are going to be blind. You will see that. And now when that happens, we think that we are giving an advantage to them or helping them by giving these dots. But actually, if you know your own country, you will know that only 1% of India is Braille literate. Only 1% of India can read these dots. So actually, if you look at the second image where the English numbers are projected a little up, that is helping them more to know the number of the floor rather than those dots that you've given them. I think we all got the point. I'm not going to extend this further, but I genuinely want you all to remember these two amazing women for their contributions in the HVAC industry, especially Alice Parker, because the history has tried very hard to make us forget her. You see the image on the left of Alice Parker? That's how she originally looks like. But in this problem of racial discrimination, everyone sketched her as a white woman. And now if you open a Wikipedia document, you open anything, you will see that image. And that's so unfair at so many levels. So I will leave you with that. I'm not saying D.E.I is important. I am just saying that think about whether it is important. Thank you.